Hello, I'm John Nagl. I'm a retired Army officer who served in both wars in Iraq, and I am privileged to be here today at Seminars at Steamboat talking about future military forces and strategies for the United States. The world is at a point of immense turmoil. There are conflicts happening on a number of continents, and the United States military needs to adapt to changing technology, changing global environment, and the many challenges we face as we try to continue to preserve peace, prosperity, and freedom for Americans as well as for our friends and partners around the globe.
On behalf of the Board of Directors of Seminars at Steamboat, I want to express our sincere thanks and great appreciation to all of the sponsors, co-sponsors, and other donors who help make this unique discussion series possible. Your support enables us to bring these impactful presentations to the Steamboat community free of any admission charge. The sponsors of this week's seminar is actually the city of Steamboat Springs. And the co-sponsors are Holly and Gary Nelson and Patricia and William Murray. Please join me in thanking them. As I previously noted, private donations make up 90% of the operating budget, and they are absolutely essential if this program is to continue and if it is to continue to be free of charge. So if you have not made a contribution for the 2026 summer session, I urge that you do so tonight by going to the seminar's website or by using the QR code printed on the back of your program. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce the moderator of tonight's seminar, Gary Nelson. Gary was one of the longest serving members of the Board of Seminars, and he has made numerous significant contributions over the years to help develop the seminar's program and to raise funds to support its continuation. With a background as a senior policy official in the Department of Defense, Gary is the ideal person to chair tonight's talk. He will introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. John Nagl, and he will then moderate the Q&A session at the conclusion. Please welcome Gary Nelson to the stage.
Greetings, and I would like to extend greetings to the best seminar audience on the face of the earth. I have done many moderations over the last 15 years, and I'm pleased to be up here once again. This is an alert audience, it's inquisitive, and it has one feature. It loves to laugh when we make mistakes, either technical glitches or verbal glitches. And so it's a very accepting audience. We'll try to avoid that, but maybe not. Dr. John Nagl, our speaker, is, you're going to be really impressed with this talk, is a West Point graduate, a Rhodes Scholar with a doctorate from Oxford, author of 2 previous books on the military. He's a career Army officer who fought and was decorated in 2 different Iraq wars. He subsequently wrote influential articles and reports leading to major changes in the Army and even the Marine Corps. And he now has a study team that is examining and writing about the Ukraine-Russia war with several volumes already completed. He's a guy that's really involved and active. He will give us a forward-looking assessment of the U.S. military as a result of new technologies and an evolving set of threats to America, including the active conflicts today. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. John Nagl.
Thank you, Gary, for that enormously kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out tonight. Steamboat is extraordinarily fortunate. There's a number of friends and mentors in the audience. One of them couldn't be with us tonight. Ken Krieg is the reason I'm here, a man I admired greatly when we worked together in the Pentagon more than 20 years ago. But Steamboat is very fortunate to have such a terrific group of involved, engaged minds interested in the subjects that matter most in the world today. And I'm really delighted to be here tonight to play a part in some of those discussions, to spark, I hope, some thinking, some questions, and perhaps some answers to some of the most challenging problems we face today. Today is my first full day in Steamboat. I've had a very Steamboat day. I woke up in the brand new Steamboat Spring Hill Suites just down the street. They put us up pretty ritzy. It's terrific. It's brand new. My wife loves the lotions and the shampoo and stuff. So if you got friends coming in, we highly recommend the Spring Hill Suites. Our 17-year-old and our 21-year-old are big fans of the free breakfast. It's a win, so that's a go. After breakfast, we hiked the Fish Creek up to the upper waterfall, which I know what you're going to ask. The bridge is open. Everybody asks, is the bridge open? The bridge is open. A beautiful hike, one of the best hikes I've ever had. And we then had lunch at the Yampa River Ice House, right? The lean brisket is off. I don't need the fat brisket, but the lean brisket is terrific. And the bear came and visited. The day can only go downhill from here. I'll do my best. I'm still up there. I'm sorry. I teach lecture at, think at a number of institutions. One of them is the George Washington University, many others. I do not speak on behalf of any of them. This is only me and only my ideas. All those institutions should be held blameless for what I say today, although I am very proud to be a part of all of the institutions with which I am affiliated. As Gary mentioned, I'm going to talk tonight about future military forces and strategies for the U.S. And with Gary and Mitch up here, I want to make sure you all understand what an extraordinarily committed group of people you have putting these seminars on. This is the list of questions they sent to me and asked me to talk about tonight. We're just going to take a look at them together if we can. Drone developments, the use of drones, that's a small topic. Hypersonic missiles, where the Russians and Chinese have a lead, that's a problem. The Marines are changing. The Army is keeping the tank, of course, is it? But more on that, right? The Carrier Strike Force, the Navy, other topics as well. There wasn't enough. Undersea space. The long lead times apparent in developing new weapons. So defense procurement as well, in addition to all of the different services and the different technologies they have to do with. Do that if you could, if you do that, so that a non-defense expert audience can understand and appreciate the topic. I want to be honest with you guys. I have given, at this point, I'm 60 years old, I have given literally hundreds of speeches all over the world on topics like these. This is what I do. This is my sweet spot. I think it's my sweet spot. We'll see. Tell me in an hour. So 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk on strategy development at the George C. Marshall Center in Garmisch, Germany. It's been a tough summer so far, and they've got some hiking there too. And literally on Friday, I fly to Oahu to do some work at the U.S. Army Pacific to give a couple of talks at U.S. Army Pacific next week. So you are welcome for my sacrifices for our security. In the hundreds of talks I have given all over the world, this is the most comprehensive and the hardest list of topics, of questions that I have been given in my entire 40 years of thinking about these issues. And so, right, I gulped a little bit when I think it was Gary, when Gary sent me these questions, and I said, I've never been to Steamboat. My best friend lives in Colorado Springs. We were there for a couple of days before we came up here. Colorado's pretty nice in the summer. Sure, I'll give it a shot. But then I realized I had to answer all those questions, right? I signed a contract and stuff. And so I decided to get back. I can get this committee. I've got you guys, right? And this is, I'm not going to take you through all of this. This is an idea called operational design. It actually originated with the Israeli Army. The first time it appeared in Army doctrine was in the 2006 Army Marine Corps Counterinsurgency Field Manual that I helped a couple of guys named Jim Mattis and Dave Petraeus write now, right at 20 years ago. I'm not sure what happened to either of them. But this is a way to think about hard problems. And it creates a pattern of mind. It helps us ask the right questions. And so some of this thinking and some of these sources, and I can, if you like it, we could pull this. This wouldn't be my recommendation, but if you guys want to, we can pull this slide up during Q&A, and I can take you through all of it. What I want you to know is that people like me, people like Hans Benedijk in the room who study these questions have come up with models and frameworks to help provide structure to the way we think about challenges and to help us develop solutions that are feasible, that are acceptable, that are suitable, that help us to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish as a nation, as a department, as a service. That doesn't mean we always get it right, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that today. I'm going to use a much simpler model tonight. You're all welcome. This is the three-legged stool of strategy. So strategy is the accomplishment of objectives, of ends. Those could be the ends of a nation, a coalition, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They can be the objectives of a family plotting a day in Steamboat Springs. Ends are what you're trying to accomplish. Those ends are accomplished using all available means in the ways that are most likely to succeed. So strategy is a relationship between ways and means in order to accomplish your objectives. And this is what I was asked to talk about. Future military forces is the means to support a military strategy. Future military strategy are ways to achieve national security objectives. Everybody with me so far? Ends, ways, and means. And we're going to start off by talking about future military strategies, about ways to achieve our national security objectives. And as Gary mentioned, to the extent that I have played a significant role in American national security policy, it is mostly because of the work I did with Generals Petraeus and Mattis, both friends and mentors. I served under Jim Mattis and Al Anbar in 2003 and 2004. Was when I helped develop counterinsurgency strategies for the United States. I had done my doctoral work at Oxford on counterinsurgency and was well positioned as a result. I had thought more about the problem than most Americans. Most Americans, I think, are more sensible than I am and don't enjoy reading the archives of the British military and the British State Foreign Service Office, but never mind. What I did then was recommend a very different strategy for the United States. I recommended that the United States adopt counterinsurgency strategies in Iraq and Afghanistan. I recommended changes in US military strategy. I am not doing that tonight. I am not doing that tonight. Instead, and I'm going to break this down into what are still the most significant regions of the world for US national security policy, other than our homeland itself. That is Europe and Asia. I'm going to start in Europe, and I'm going to quote one of my favorite thinkers on national security policy, and that is, of course, myself. This is a piece I wrote with a good friend, actually. I was with Colonel Jerry Landrum in Garmisch last week, and we wrote a little piece on NATO's 75th anniversary. And I say this with trepidation. One of the world's great scholars of NATO is sitting in the second row looking at me fairly disapprovingly. So I'm going to watch Hans as I say this. These are my words from this article I wrote with Jerry a couple of years ago on the 75th anniversary of NATO. And what I said in that piece is that America's unflinching commitment to NATO prevented World War III, saving millions of lives. It was the founding security concept for the greatest period of peace and prosperity the world has ever seen. After the horrors of the First and the Second World Wars, which killed more than 100 million people in a little more than a generation, the absence of great power war for the next 4 generations has been a boon that few could have predicted, but from which all peoples worldwide have benefited from the absence of great power war. And I'm going to spend a minute on this. I'm a student of warfare, I guess, obviously, and have been privileged to spend some time in Europe walking battlefields, and I'm always struck by the horrors of the First World War. And the First World War was so bad, right? It was called the Great War. No one could imagine one bigger. It was called the war to end all wars because nobody could imagine doing it again. And ultimately, the United States played a decisive role in the First World War when we committed in 1917 and helped a France that was nearing exhaustion, a Britain whose hegemony had been destroyed on the battlefield of the Somme. And the United States played a decisive role in winning the First World War, but then abdicated its position in the world. Woodrow Wilson's plans for a League of Nations succeeded, but without the United States, at that point, the greatest latent power in the world, the international system collapsed. A system of escalating tariffs did grave damage to the global economy. And a generation after the war to end all wars, we fought the World War Part II. Right? In some ways, I think of it as one world war with a 20-year interregnum. Right? And this is ideas drawn from E.H. Carr, the 20 Years Crisis. And we got to do it over again. And with 2 wars that killed a total of 100 million people, engulfed the world in flame in the first half of the 20th century, we have no reason to expect that there would not be another. That there has not been another is not the result of luck. It is a result of an extraordinary amount of work by generations of Americans and Frenchmen and Brits and Germans and Japanese and people all over the globe, right? But largely including your sons and daughters who have chosen to wear the uniform of the United States, have served all over the globe, and have collectively prevented another world war from happening. What I'm going to argue at the end of the talk is that 75 years of success does not guarantee, right? Past performance is no guarantee of future returns, and there is no guarantee that we will not fight another world war in our lifetimes. And there is a non-zero possibility that third world war has already begun. But I am as, that really took the air out of the room, didn't it? Yeah, wait for that. It's cheery. My wife calls me Dr. Doom. I'm fun at parties. Well, there's some ways we may succeed, but what we should not do is give up NATO. And another thing we should not do is give up the series of bilateral alliances, partnerships, agreements that we have across the Asia-Pacific, right? Currently presenting a shield, a framework, right? A series of limits upon the capabilities of the world's, the other superpower, the other great power in the world, China, our pacing challenge, and right, a very close economic competitor to us, the United States. In 1945, the United States had 50% of world GDP, 50%, right? Obviously, we no longer have that, but GDP is a contributor, a principal source of military strength, and China is using its extraordinary GDP, its extraordinary manufacturing capability to build, for instance, a larger Navy than is possessed by the United States Navy, right? And the United States Navy has to cover the globe. China still regionally focused. Talk more about navies in a second. This is a picture 2 years ago. I was at U.S. Army Pacific headquarters teaching the same course that I'm going to teach next week. There's something called the Theater Army Staff Course. As part of that course, I visited for the first time Pearl Harbor, and I will be back at Pearl this coming Sunday morning. Sunday morning is the right time to visit Pearl. It's quiet. Most people sleep in. And of course, a bunch of people were sleeping in on that particular Sunday morning, now 80 years and more ago. And on that day, that horrible day for the United States military, arguably the worst day in American military history, because the U.S. Army in the Pacific, because the U.S. and the Navy Pacific were asleep. We lost thousands of soldiers, thousands of sailors. And the job of the U.S. Army Pacific, the job of all of our military commands around the globe, but perhaps in particular U.S. Army Pacific, is to make sure that we are never that unprepared again. We are able to do that as a result of the capabilities that the American people provide to the Department of War. So that, for instance, we stopped at the pass coming from Colorado Springs to up to Route 9, past Divide. There's we're looking over South Park. There's a pass there. What's the name of the pass? Someone knows the name? No, before Hoosier Pass. Wilkerson Pass. Wilkerson Pass. And the guy in the gift shop where we contributed to the economy of Colorado, but asked if any veterans were in the group, and I said I was, and he said, thanks for your service, and I said, thanks, did you ever serve? He said, no, but my son is serving now. He's actually flying in to surprise me. He's in the Army, in the 25th Infantry Division, stationed in Hawaii. He is just back from spending some time in the Philippines, working with the Philippines military, right, trying to make sure that, as I said in this piece, one of my favorite writers on national security policy, that would be me, said, right, trying to convince China that today is not the day and tomorrow doesn't look good either, that America is ready, as we were not on December 7th, 1941, America is ready to ensure the security of the Asia Pacific. So for the first two questions I was answered that focused on military strategy, no change. On the ways that America accomplishes its national security objective, no change. On the means, the tools we use to implement those strategies, many changes, not all changes, but many changes, big changes, and I'm going to talk to some of those now. Drones and artificial intelligence is an extraordinarily complicated and an extraordinarily interesting set of questions in levels of increasing difficulty in the air, at sea, and just nascently now on land. Drones are changing the face of warfare. And one of the questions we think about, the ways I think about changes in warfare are that the character of war changes, but the nature does not. The nature of war remains, as Clausewitz told us, the use of violence to compel our enemy to do our will, and the accomplishment of political objectives through other means, right? But the character of war changes. Technology is one of the things that most changes the character of war, and drones using non-human systems offers the extraordinary potential, conceivably, of bloodless war. It is not the case today, and in fact, in the war in Ukraine, which as Gary mentioned, I spent a bunch of time thinking about, drones are now doing perhaps 80% of the killing on the Ukrainian forces on Russian. We don't have as good of data on what's happening inside Russia and on the Russian side, but drones have absolutely changed that war. My friend Paul is an artilleryman. 4 years ago, 80% of the killing in Ukraine was being done by artillery pieces, right? And that in just 4 years, that has changed through the use of a number of mostly unmanned systems, missiles, drones, seaborne drones now increasingly. The Ukraine, which has no navy, a country that has no navy, has defeated and essentially destroyed the Black Sea Fleet, the pride of the Russian Navy. The scope and scale of that accomplishment is hard to understand. A friend of mine, Lieutenant General Curtis Buzzard, who's retiring from his position as the commander of the Security Assistance Group Ukraine in Wiesbaden next week. Kurt Buzzard has in his office showed me a present given to him by a Ukrainian friend of his. It's the Black Sea, and the Russian fleet is at the bottom of the Black Sea. It's an extraordinary little illustration of what Ukraine has been able to do largely on its own. And Ukraine is now signing agreements with countries around the globe, including just last week, the United States, to share its drone technology with the rest of the world in order to increase the security of the world and its ability to deter war. Finally, ground combat, largely because of drones, it has become unbelievably difficult to do things like logistically resupply troops forward or to evacuate casualties. And so increasing the toughest domain to operate in is the ground. The ground is complicated, as I saw on the trail today. There's a lot of obstacles. Imagine, right? Imagine running robots up and down those trails. And the Chinese, I could put up a video, the Chinese are developing robots that can do that can fight alpine, right? We now have, we're not going to talk much, at least the prepared talks about social media, but we have videos of Russian soldiers surrendering to drones, being escorted back to Ukrainian lines by drones. We have ground combat drones, like the one in the picture. The picture is a logistical drone in that picture conducting medical evacuation. But we have ground drones that are armed with weapons. We have Ukrainian sea drones that are armed with ground-to-air, surface-to-air missiles. And in fact, a Ukrainian naval drone shot down a Russian helicopter that was engaging it. So the pace of change is very, very fast. When we add artificial intelligence to the picture, and you have seen in place of fireworks, which I'm guessing are not a big thing here, right around July 4th. I don't know if your community is one of the ones that uses drones to make patterns in the sky, to paint pictures. You are? You guys do that? Yeah. Now, so you've seen what they can do. Now imagine that each of them has a bomb. Right. And so these are some of the challenges that we face that are changing the way we fight, and I believe will continue to change the way we fight. The lessons of Ukraine, I say this all the time, I have to say it again. We have two, in particular on the Ukrainian side, enormously brave soldiers, enormously brave country, but still recovering from Soviet domination. With Russia and Ukraine, we have two not very good armies fighting each other. Neither of them have been able to achieve air supremacy. And so the lessons of Ukraine have to be taken with a grain of salt. We have they don't apply directly to the United States and our military, which is much more capable, and it will be even more capable as we acquire some of the Ukrainian capabilities, some of the Ukrainian systems, and build them under license. But I do not believe right now Ukraine has become is in a situation analogous to the First World War, the trench warfare of the First World War. The war is defense dominant right now, at least in that war. At least in that war. Not as much in the Strait of Hormuz. We can talk about that as well. I believe that the offense-defense balance will continue to change, and that, in particular, America fighting a war would have more ability to succeed against drones and be able to restore maneuver to the battlefield in a way that neither Russia nor Ukraine have been for the last couple of years. We can talk more on that later. Hypersonics. Hypersonics differ in degree, and in most cases not so much to be a difference in kind. Hypersonic means more than 5 times the speed of sound. We have of course, had missiles on which we have affixed weapons for decades at this point. We are very fortunate that rocket science and really rocket engineering is actually harder than nuclear engineering, in particular for the case of North Korea. North Korea obviously has created nuclear weapons, most estimates somewhere in the 50 to 60 range, but has not been able to master building intercontinental ballistic missiles. Were it able to do so, we would be facing a very different security situation in the United States, and in particular on the West Coast. But we have, both China and Russia have been able to produce missiles that fly at 5 times the speed of sound. Some of those missiles have the ability to maneuver during their terminal phase, which makes it enormously difficult to shoot them down. As of right now, I know of no reports of Iran using hypersonic missiles, but I have multiple open press accounts of both Russia and China assisting Iran in the development of its systems. Were Iran to acquire hypersonic missiles, that would be a source of grave concern. I want to spend a minute on the diagram of China with the range fans, the circles, showing the distances that Chinese missiles can hit. And you can see they extend well beyond the so-called first island chain of Taiwan, the Philippines, and Japan. Guam, the incredibly important American logistics base in the Pacific, is within the range fan of some of those Chinese missiles. When we conduct war games against China, those missiles create real problems for our aircraft carriers, for aircraft carriers to engage. More on that in a minute. I'm going to talk about a couple of the services. The Marines, you may not know, have gone through a substantial force redesign called Force Design 2030. I fought with the Marines, for General Mattis in Al Anbar in an Army brigade, 1st Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division, the Devil Brigade, and we had a Marine battalion inside our brigade, so Marine 2-star, Army Colonel, Marine Lieutenant Colonel. So worked very closely with the Marines in Iraq. The Marines served with enormous valor in both Iraq and Afghanistan. They cannot do that now. We have changed the Marine Corps dramatically. We have changed the Marine Corps to focus on the Pacific. We have gotten rid of most of their tubed artillery. We have gotten rid of all of their tanks. The Marines are lighter, and they are optimized for the role they played during the Second World War. That's as a result of the Department of Defense, Department of War's move back to large-scale combat operations after 20 years of not completely successful counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's okay. We can do that with the Marines because we have an army. We have an army. And here I push back hard on the committee, which asked me whether I want to build an army that is lighter and more mobile. I do not. I do not. And I think the question fundamentally misunderstands the role of the army. The role of the army is not so much to win wars as having won wars to stay there and make sure that it doesn't happen again. Right, and this is the purpose in particular of the U.S. Army Europe, where when I entered the Army, we had 2 heavy corps in Europe. The Army is there to stay. When you send the Army somewhere, you are making a commitment. The Marines can go in and go out. They are lighter. They do not have as much fighting power. They are not able to sustain themselves as long. The Army is the commitment of ground troops is the most serious commitment a nation can make, and the commitment of the Army is a different thing than committing the Marines. Again, one of my favorite strategists, a piece I wrote a couple of years ago saying China can wait, the Army's focus should be Europe. While we have a pacing challenge in China, right, we have an acute challenge, and some might say an acute threat in Russia that has demonstrated that it is willing to use force to change the borders in Europe. something that the Europeans thought was over 30 years ago, but which is clearly back in force. Carrier strike groups. I previewed this a few minutes ago with the range fans of Chinese missiles. The carrier strike group, the force structure design around which the Navy has been built since 1942, when we didn't have much of a choice because the battleships were at the bottom of Pearl. Right? I'm extraordinarily fortunate that the carriers happened to be out at sea doing exercises when that happened. The carrier has been the dominant force at sea since 1942, and I argue that it is no longer so. That in large-scale combat operations against a near-peer enemy, read China, the carriers' airplanes don't have long enough legs to be able to defeat the range fans of those Chinese missiles. That is, the Chinese can sink the carriers before our airplanes can do damage to those missile launching systems, even if we wanted to use those airplanes to drop bombs on a nuclear-armed China that is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal. And since Russia and China acquired nuclear weapons, we have not engaged in direct conflict with either. Obviously, direct conflict with China during the Korean War, but they were not yet a nuclear-armed state. The question of attacking the homeland with uniformed forces of a nuclear-armed power is an extraordinarily challenging one. But I believe that while carriers are extraordinarily useful, we currently have two of them operating around the Strait of Hormuz, trying to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. They are very useful for smaller wars. They are no longer the ship of choice for large-scale combat operations. That is instead this is a Virginia-class attack boat, the USS Mississippi. One of the great adventures of my life. One of them was landing aboard and taking off from, so tailhook and then catapult launch off of the Truman, the USS Harry Truman, give him hell, carrier. I also got to go undersea, aboard the USS Mississippi. The USS Mississippi, a Virginia-class attack boat. And undersea remains one of the very, very few areas in which the United States continues to have a technological advantage over all of our enemies, including, in particular, the Chinese extraordinary capability. I do want to say, as I put up pictures of the Navy, that the United States Navy currently, I grabbed the numbers, is currently at 290 ships. That is the smallest number of fighting ships we've had in the United States Navy since, are you ready for this? 1915. 1915, as we were facing, with the Chinese Navy now roughly somewhere between 500 and 600 ships, the biggest naval challenge we faced, at least since the collapse of the Soviet Union. While I'm putting numbers out, the United States Army, currently at, active Army, currently at 452,000, smallest United States active Army since 1940, since before World War II. And the Air Force, more important than the size of the Air Force, the age of the planes. U.S. Air Force, average age of an airplane, 30 years, 30-year-old airplanes, that's the average. For the Air Force, planes like the B-52 going to be flying up to a century, not as worried about them, but we have an awful lot of airplanes that are older than the pilots who are flying them. Right? And so it's a good thing we still have a technological lead. On submarines, I'll preview the defense industrial base question here while I've got a picture of the submarine up. On the list of the things that you need to make good submarines, welders. Welders is really high, and you don't want apprentice welders. They need to be. They need to know what they're doing. I can't tell you how far underwater I went in the sub. It's deeper than I go when I scuba dive. I can promise that we do not have enough welders. We are in such short supply of welders that during the Super Bowl, not last year, but 2 years ago, we used that incredibly expensive advertising time to ask kids to become welders because we don't have enough welders, and we need more of these, but we don't have enough welders. But that's okay because it's really easy to learn how to be a really good welder. It only takes about 10 years. And so we are supposed to be producing 2 of these a year. We're currently able to produce 1.2 of them a year because we don't have enough welders. Space is the other place, the other area in which we have a clear advantage over our adversaries. We have such a clear advantage over our adversaries that there is every possibility that were we to go to war with China, that China would try to take space off the table by putting up essentially a fragmentation grenade in space. Our satellites would then fly into it. You don't need any momentum behind it. If you put grains of sand in space, missiles moving at 15,000 miles an hour, right, bump into it, and the satellites are disabled. Very, very hard to armor satellites. Impossible to armor the satellites that we already have up there. But this is an area where we have great strengths, but our strengths are vulnerable. Our strengths are vulnerable. Cyber is an area where we have still some advantages, but diminishing. And the proliferation of artificial intelligence and of high-end chips is not helping us maintain our advantage in cyber. I do not expect us to continue to have an advantage in cyber for long as artificial intelligence proliferates. Space is harder. We have a bigger first mover advantage. I expect us to continue to maintain our ability there. I've already previewed some of this, the questions of procurement, and I put up Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his terrific speech, Ominous Days. I've walked farther than I'm supposed to, I'm sorry. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Ominous Days speech, given just as France was falling in 1940. I want to underline before I read you this clip from it. 18 months before Pearl Harbor, 18 months before the United States entered World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt went to Congress and said during the past year, American production capacity for warplanes, including engines, has risen from 6,000 a year to more than double that number. Our immediate problem is to superimpose on this capacity a greatly additional production capacity. I'm screwing up the quote, but you know what I'm saying. I should like to see this nation geared up to turn out at least 50,000 airplanes a year. Over the course of World War II, the United States, the roughly 5 years of major combat in World War II, the United States produced 250,000 airplanes. 250,000 airplanes. And we would not have been able to do it if Franklin Delano Roosevelt had not gone to Congress 18 months before Pearl Harbor to start spinning industry up. Why does it take so long to produce weapon systems? It's a very complicated series of questions. A bunch of it is the fault of the military, which can't figure out what it wants. A bunch of it is because Congress doesn't appropriate the money. Right? A bunch of it is because neither Congress nor the American people feel the need to do that right now. I'm going to try to increase your interest in doing that in the next 10 minutes or so. The picture in the middle is of a Liberty ship at our high point during World War II. We were producing a Liberty ship every day. The United States currently produces, anybody want to guess? China produces 50%, 50%, half of all world shipping by tonnage. Anybody want to guess what percent the United States produces? Four lower? A lot lower. In fact, the answer is roughly 0.5%. Not 5%, 0.5% of global shipping. That's a problem. That's a problem. The tank picture, I can't remember now if it's a Ford plant or a Chevy plant that was converted to produce main battle tanks during World War II. We can't do that now. Last year, Poland wanted to buy 500 M1 tanks. We couldn't give them to them. We couldn't sell them to them. We couldn't make them fast enough. They bought 100 M1 tanks and 400 K1 tanks. The Korean K1 is a great tank. It's a great tank. But I really feel like America should have been able to produce 500 tanks. 500 tanks, given that we produced some 50,000 during the 5 years of World War II. This is an enormous challenge, an enormous problem. Just to further increase your cheer, the world is a mess. The world is an absolute mess. The Russo-Ukrainian war, Hamas and Hezbollah fighting against Israel, supported both of those organizations, supported by Iran, a global pariah state in which the United States, and I think just the United States right now, is fighting a war. I've talked about North Korea's nuclear ambitions and capabilities already, and talked a little bit to the US and the People's Republic of China. This is where the talk really gets cheery. I read newspapers in the morning, because I do. And so right at 2 years ago, I read George Will in the Post saying correctly, the great unraveling that was World War II began maybe with Japan's 1931 invasion of Manchuria. Without the benefit of retrospection, we cannot be certain that World War III has not already begun. That is a true statement. History is lived forward, only understood backwards, right? So that caught my attention, but not enough to write it down, because George Will gets paid by the amount of ink he sells, right? Smart guy, don't get me wrong. But when a week later, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Mike McCall was asked a throwaway question by a reporter, by a Washington Post reporter on the record. The throwaway question, Mr. Chairman, what keeps you up at night? Mike McCall said, on the record, he said, World War III. An unholy alliance between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, threatening both Europe and the Pacific. Chairman McCall is a smart guy. He is also one of the 20 or 25 most briefed people in the United States government. Chairman McCall did not come up with that on his own. And it was when I read that quote that I went back and captured George Will's quotes and started paying pretty close attention to this idea that smart people were saying World War III might have already begun. Phil Zelikow is a name you don't know, almost certainly, but should. Some of you will have read, this audience will have read the 9/11 Commission report. Phil Zelikow was the executive director of that commission, and that is a terrific government document. I commend it to you. Phil Zelikow is calm and sober and rational and reasoned. He is not prone to alarmism, but in the Texas National Security Review in May of '24, piece titled Confronting Another Axis, Phil said, a serious possibility of worldwide warfare, maybe only in the 20 to 30% range. But that's not very reassuring. No, Phil, that's not reassuring at all. That really scared me. And then Andrea Kendall-Taylor and Richard Fontaine at the Center for New American Security in Washington, D.C., which I used to run in Foreign Affairs a couple of months later, said, coordination among China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia, it's real. Their shared aim of weakening the United States and its leadership role provides a strong adhesive. Those countries want a different world order than the one the United States has created with NATO, with the World Trade Organization, with the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. They want a different world. And Andrea and Richard said, the fact that they all share that same desire makes them close. I give a longer version of this talk in which I put up pictures of the leaders of these countries visiting each other, something that did not happen among the leaders of the Axis powers during the Second World War. There is closer coordination among those four countries right now than there ever was by the Axis powers during the Second World War. Andrea and Richard say we should be paying attention. It's easy to throw rocks at Congress. Every once in a while, Congress does really wonderful things. Before the last presidential elections, the Congress decided to appoint a commission on the national defense strategy. The co-chairs of that commission were Jane Harman, former member of Congress at that point from California. She introduced herself as the representative from Boeing. Jane, a very impressive strategic thinker. I worked with her on the Defense Policy Board. Her Republican co-chair was Eric Edelman, former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, a friend and mentor. The two of them pulled together a report that was designed to influence the presidential elections of 2024 when America most closely focuses on the direction of the country. Cleverly planned to drop exactly 2 years ago. The report is unclassified. The executive summary is about 7 pages. You should go home and read it tonight. It says, what do you do for fun? It says, the threats the United States faces are the most serious and most challenging we've encountered since '45. They include the potential for a near-term major war, and the nation is not prepared. Jane and Eric, in that paper, recommended a budget increase, the Department of Defense at that time, budget increase of 50%. Of 50% in the 1.5 trillion area, which is almost exactly what the Trump administration has asked for. It was designed to influence the presidential elections. It landed with a whisper. It did not get the attention it deserves. It deserves your attention. Read the executive summary. The best Secretary of Defense we've ever had in my eyes is Bob Gates, the only Secretary of Defense to ever work for 2 different presidents. Astonishingly, he worked for 2 different presidents of 2 different parties, right? With Dave Petraeus, the man most responsible for turning the Iraq war around, one of my heroes, one of the best public servants we've produced since George C. Marshall. Bob Gates said in the Post, Bob Gates can publish in the Post any day he wants to. He chose in late, just before the presidential election, to write, after a 30-year holiday from history, we face an aggressive China and Russia, abetted by North Korea and Iran, and the very real prospect of war between nuclear-armed great powers. Went the wrong way. If World War III happens, or if World War III is already happening, it is likely to be a long war. To deter war, we have to be prepared to win it. But success in protracted war relies on logistics and production from a defense industrial base that Phil Zelikow says is fragile and hollow. We have a minimal capacity. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine full on, this time we had the ability to produce about 50,000 155 millimeter artillery rounds a year. That's because we were using in training about 50,000 155 rounds a year. We have now, 4 years later, I visited the Scranton Army ammunition plant where the metal casings are built. We are now at the point where we can build 1 million a year. We would need to build somewhere between 5 and 10 times that if we were to go to war with either Russia or China on the ground. It took us 4 years and billions of dollars to scale up the Scranton Army ammunition plant. And those are the easy ones. That's literally World War I technology, steel, and gunpowder. The high-end stuff, the missiles, ships, tanks, aircraft, is much more difficult. We are currently shipping, because of a shortage of rare earth materials, rare earth minerals. We're in a trade dispute with China over them. We are currently shipping, it's astonishing to me that this is not classified, but it isn't. We are shipping high-end, brand new fighter aircraft without radar systems. They have concrete in the nose cones as ballast so that they behave in the air as they will when the radar systems go in. But we can't produce the radar systems. We don't have the rare earth metals. That does not bode well for our ability to dramatically increase the performance of the production of airplanes should we need them. We are likely to lose if we go to war with either Russia or China. These are official Department of Defense, Department of War numbers, as much in 2 weeks as we lost in 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan put together. Order of magnitude, 7,500 to 10,000 dead, 50,000 wounded in 2 weeks. The individual ready reserve, the previously trained replacements we have for the Army, we had 750,000 of them in the IRR in 1973 when we started the all-volunteer force. Now 53 years later, we have about 75,000 folks in the IRR. We don't have a bench. This led me and one of my students a couple of years ago to write a piece asking, was 50 years long enough? Do we need to resume the draft in the United States? Both France and Germany are in the process of resuming the draft. And so, we should probably think hard about these questions. This is my last slide. The historian Tim Snyder suggests that it's 1938 when Neville Chamberlain surrendered Czechoslovakia to the Nazis, but he says this time the Czechs, the Ukrainians, are fighting back. If it's 1938 and World War III is going to start next year, what should our future military forces and strategies be? Those, I think, are the questions we should be thinking about. I am delighted to have had the chance to declaim my thoughts, some of my thoughts on those, and I look forward very much to your questions.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you very much for an enlightening and, in some ways, disturbing, but certainly insightful look of this. If we start with the easy part,
Is there an easy part?
drones.
Okay.
Drones. It's obvious. It's obvious that they have changed the nature of warfare. And how does the U.S. respond to that?
By buying a whole ton of drones. One of my former students, I taught early in my career at the United States Military Academy, and I had a student on exchange from the Naval Academy. And the kid really struggled, obviously, because West Point is a much better school. But I did what I could. And that young man, who I called Squid, became a Marine, and a highly decorated Marine. And Colonel Scott Cuomo, United States Marine Corps, is now in charge of drones for the United States Marines. And he is doing terrific work in developing the capabilities, in talking to industry and training Marines. And the Marines now have drones as an inherent part of every one of their ground formations. And that has happened over the course of the last year since Scotty was given this job. We are off by orders of magnitude, not in order of magnitude, but orders of magnitude. We need a Ukrainian battalion of perhaps 500 soldiers is going through 1,000 drones a week and is doing fascinating things, right? So every hit has to be observed by another drone, right, that is filming what's going on. And every hit is graded, every strike is graded, and they are given points for destroying Russian forces. It's a bit macabre, but it's true. And they use those, and the points vary by what the higher command wants to have destroyed this particular day, this particular week. And they get points back for destroying those things, and they can then use those points to buy additional drones, the next set of drones they need. And so the best units get all the drones they want. But more importantly than that, if there could be something more important than that, than putting weapons in the hand of warfighters who are defending the very existence of their country, the manufacturers know what the soldiers want right now, real time, every minute, right? What do they want right now? And they can turn in factories that are under constant threat of attack. They can turn on a dime. The adaptation reaction cycle, it takes place in weeks. And it takes the United States years, if not decades, to bring a weapon system from a designer's board all the way into the hand of the troops. Now, necessity is the mother of invention. The Ukrainians are across the board, are incredibly motivated. And we are now, as I mentioned during the talk, entering into joint production agreements with them. I predict both that Ukraine will survive as an independent country and that it will be one of the biggest providers of defense technology in the world here in the next decade, because of the exquisite capabilities that they've developed, but in particular because of those reaction cycles. We have a ton of learning to do. It's not all the fault of the defense contractors. They are accountable to their stockholders. They need multi-year contracts, and they need, in my opinion, given this extraordinary period of change in warfare, relief from some of the legislative fixes that they've accumulated over the past 50 or 75 years in response to fraud, in response to production mistakes, in response to all those things. The system isn't is not designed for a period of rapid change, the one we're in today. And so we need real work on Capitol Hill. We need work in the halls of industry. And we also need the military to think really hard about how it can learn from what's happening in Ukraine, but also what's happening right now across the Middle East. Well, I'll stop.
The United States builds high-end systems.
It does.
So if you look at what we're using to shoot down enemy drones and missiles, or what we're using things that cost 100 times as much. And some of the production, I would assert, some of the production things are the complexity of the systems that we buy, and we want to have the best systems. But is there a high-end, low-end kind of argument that we should be pursuing?
That's exactly right. And so we are rapidly moving. The best example is probably the Air Force moving to robotic wingmen, so that there is still a reason to have manned aircraft as fast as electrons move. Right, the hand on the stick is actually in the air is quicker, but a field of very high-end drones to dramatically expand the reach and the protection capabilities of our manned aircraft. I think we've probably seen the last generation of manned aircraft, but for right now at least, we should be buying those robotic wingmen. Much harder, as I mentioned, on the ground, to build robotic tanks, but the Ukrainians are doing some good work there. We correctly, I think, as Americans, value the lives, the well-being of our all-volunteer force, but not everything has to be the best. And we can use artificial intelligence, I think, increasingly to decide whether we can react to a relatively low-end drone attack with machine guns, with electromagnetic spectrum attacks, rather than with, for instance, a Patriot, which are in incredibly short supply.
And are we moving to...
Not as fast as we need to be.
As we need to.
Not as fast as we need to be.
Right.
And we're in an astonishing position. The National Defense Authorization Act has not yet passed. We are canceling training events right now for the U.S. military because we haven't been able to get a supplemental through. And right, there's give and take there. The members of Congress of both parties want more engagement from the Pentagon. One of the things I did when I was working for the two different deputy secretaries of defense was help them prepare for meetings with members of Congress who represent all of us. The most direct representation we have as Americans is our members of Congress. That relationship, I think, always needs tending and needs some work now, as members of Congress are asked to make an extraordinary 50% increase, an extraordinary $500 billion increase in the defense budget in order to get after some of these problems. Mm-hmm. But do the American people want that? Are the American people willing to give up what it would take to make those changes and provide those systems? And I don't think we've had that national conversation yet. That's why I think sessions like this are so important.
A question from the audience. Mm-hmm. If your sons entered the Army today, what would you want them to understand about future warfare the rest of us don't yet appreciate?
So that my stepsons are in the room. I hope they know more about that now than they did an hour ago. One of my favorite thinkers on war is a man named Thomas Gibbons Neff, who until just this month wrote for the New York Times. Thomas was a Marine sniper in Afghanistan. And he wrote an extraordinary piece in the New York Times, his sort of farewell piece. He is now becoming a teacher, which makes me extraordinarily happy for him and even more happy for his students. But Thomas starts the piece by saying, I killed 7 men, maybe 8. I'm not sure whether one of them bled out or whether he lived. But he says, I think about them every day. And so we're either of my two stepsons who are in the room, my biological son, in California to join the military. The thing that I would most want them to understand is not anything I've talked about today at all, but something that Homer talked about 3,000 years ago, about the cost of war on the individual soldier, on the people who fight them, the people who have physical wounds, the people who have mental wounds. Almost everyone has at least the mental wounds. And so I would want them to be strong in themselves, and I would want them to believe in America and believe that America, although it makes mistakes, right, has been a force, an extraordinary force for good in the world, in particular for the last 75 years. And I would want them to watch The Odyssey, and which is a big ask, right, for a 17-year-old. There are some monsters, but really it's a story, as Matt Damon says, about the new Odyssey, Chris Nolan's Odyssey, which I encourage all of you to watch. Right, Matt Damon, when asked what the movie was about for him, said it's about post-traumatic stress disorder. It's about what a soldier does in war, and how soldiers come home from war, and how we as people, right, as a country, as a nation, take care of those we have sent to do our dirty work for us when they come home. I'll tell a quick story if I can. When I came back from my first war, Operation Desert Storm, the last war we won, it's a coincidence, but right, when I came back from Desert Storm, we were welcomed with open arms. I couldn't buy a drink in a bar, I couldn't buy dinner in a restaurant. America welcomed us back out of all proportion to what we had just done. But I think America recognized that it had treated the Vietnam generation badly, that the soldiers had been doing what they were told to do by their nation, and that America, whether it supported the war itself or not, should have welcomed the veterans back. And so,
heading in a different direction, these have not been good years for Russia. It has apparently been weakened. How does that change the threat?
So I was talking to Hans about this before the talk. Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin is a megalomaniac in control of nuclear weapons and in control of a not very good army, but of a country that is devoting perhaps 40% of its federal budget, its national budget, to its military, to a war that under current conditions he cannot win, but that he as a dictator cannot afford to lose. And so I am absolutely terrified that Putin is going to make the problem bigger, perhaps by attacking more directly than he already has a NATO country, and trying to break the bonds between the United States and NATO. And that is the scenario. The Sulaki Gap is a phrase that sadly you should all know. The Sulaki Gap is the route to Kaliningrad, and it is a point of great vulnerability and great danger for our friends and partners, in particular in the Balts and in Poland. Poland is deeply, deeply committed to not living again under Russian domination. It's spending about 5% of GDP on defense. I mentioned it's buying very good tanks, and a lot of them. The Baltic states don't have the depth, they don't have the geographic depth that Poland does, they don't have the resources. Their armies, while valiant, would not be able to stand without help. And so, terrifically, our NATO allies and partners are stationing forces permanently inside the Baltic countries, right, inside Poland, to shore up what's called the Eastern Flank Deterrence Line against Russia, to try to ensure that Russia also knows not today and tomorrow doesn't look good either. I'm just going to say one sort of deeply historically ironic fact about that. Germany, which is considering moving toward a draft, doubling its defense budget, doubling the size of its military, has now permanently stationed its forces with tanks in the Baltics. I was as I mentioned at the,
Wow.
I mentioned I was at the George C. Marshall Center. I was talking with a German colonel last week, and was talking to him about that, and he said, yeah, for us Germans, it's a little weird. Right? We're taking our tanks to other European countries and putting our soldiers there and saying, you're sure you want us to do this, right?
It's the last question, and a very good one. You referenced Roosevelt's ominous speech. Is it possible both that we're having a similar moment, but that Americans are really underestimating what is a very real threat over the next 2 or 3 years?
I'm sad to say I think that's true. I've been doing this project, working on this project, studying these questions actually from before the George Will quote I put up that started this presentation. It goes further back, it goes further forward. I can do an hour easily on almost anything. You may pick that up, but I can do that talk by itself in an hour. When I started the project, I called it Project 1938 because most historians believe that was the last year we could have prevented World War II from becoming a global war. I have recently started calling it Project 1939.
Well, thank you very much for this, and it's really a wonderful talk and very insightful.